Hey guys, this is The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Now, this is the direct sequel to The Breath of the Wild. So, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and here is Tears of the Kingdom. Now, not only is this a direct sequel to the previous game, it takes place in the same overworld, and a lot of the same places and features and characters are still in this game. So it's almost, and a lot of the way you play the game, a lot of the game mechanics are the same. So this is basically like, you could think of it as Breath of the Wild 2.0. It's like a redo of the original game. They have changed some things. I'm going to go over what they changed, but a lot of what you get from that game is still here. So some of it might seem like a repeat or redundant thing, but I think they've changed enough stuff around that this is pretty different. Also, this is, we'll get into that. But yeah, similar overworld. And if a lot of people talk about, which one should you start with? Which one should you play first? And obviously start with Breath of the Wild. If you're going to do both, start with Breath of the Wild, because that's the order they go in, even though it doesn't really matter. It doesn't reveal any secrets that you won't get with this one. But also, I believe you're supposed to be able to import your data from that game into this game. So I think certain things like with your horse, you'll get in this one. If you played the previous one, you can choose to have it in this game. I forget. I didn't do that because I played Breath of the Wild on my old Switch, which broke, and I didn't import the game to my new Switch. Anyways, there's this game. So there's a few things they did differently with this game. Now, first off, before I discuss the most important thing, which is like the sky and the underground, one thing to note is it feels like a lot of the stuff that happened in Breath of the Wild, even though this is a direct sequel, a lot of the stuff that happened in the Breath of the Wild, in Tears of the Kingdom, they just pretend like it didn't happen. Like a lot of those towers and shrines that you discovered, all gone. They just disappeared. Because you don't want to play through the same stuff, but somehow they just conveniently pretend like it never happened. And, a lot of the different, ancient stuff that was laying around in the fields and stuff, all gone. So they added new things to this, which a lot of it appears, they show you where it comes from at the beginning of the game, so that makes sense. But the other thing is they instead of having those towers that would come out of the ground in the first Breath of the Wild, those all disappeared, and they built new towers. So you go around and go to these different encampments or whatever else where they built towers, and you help them get them in working order or unlock them or whatever, so they can then, these towers will basically shoot you up into the air, and then you can use your glider to glide along, and that introduces a new gaming mechanic where you can fly from a really high altitude and fly around to more places, which is great and all. But to do that, to get these new towers in there, they had to get rid of the old towers. So all those old towers you unlocked in the previous game, they just disappeared. Where did they go? I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. They had to do it for the gameplay of the new game, but they just disappeared for whatever reason. And they introduced totally new shrine, whole other set of shrines, same way as the old one. I think the newer shrines looked a lot cooler. The aesthetic, it's more of like a Zelda-like aesthetic, and it fits better in a Zelda. I feel like that was better for a Zelda game, but a whole new set of shrines, and all the old ones just disappeared and they just pretend like they never existed. They pretend like a lot of the stuff that happened in the previous game just never happened. It was really weird. But in any case, yeah, it is still a successor. Basically, the beginning of this game, they start out with, full health and all the upgrades and stuff, and it starts out where the old game left off, and you're like exploring the castle and getting things fixed up, and then a huge calamity hits, right? Basically, you end up freeing this, basically, I guess accidentally, there's some, dark stuff coming from deep in the castle. You explore it, and you end up kind of like freeing the Demon King, who I guess you defeated in the previous game. He was in the castle, and I guess you're freeing him again in this game, but in a totally different way, which is weird, but that's how it happened. So anyways, he ends up like touching your hand, and you lose your arm, and then you wake up in this temple where your arm was restored by some ancient sage who you learn more about as the game goes on. And basically, once you freed the Demon King accidentally or whatever at the beginning of the game, a bunch of these pieces of the ground launch up into the sky, into like these floating islands that weren't there before. So you have these huge floating islands in the sky, and then a bunch of holes open up in the ground that go down to this deep underworld with a bunch of like ancient ruins and stuff to explore there as well. So that was one of the major things about this game. One of the big things that make it what it is not only do they have the regular overworld with all the shrines, and they did introduce some dungeons, some real dungeons, not as many as previous games, and still not quite what I felt like they should be, but they were better than the Divine Beasts in Breath of the Wild. They were pretty good, give them a thumbs up there. But not only do you have all of that stuff, but you had a world up in the sky made of floating islands, a lot of floating islands to explore, and then you had an underworld below everything. So you would have your normal caves in the game that are at surface level. You can go deep into these caves, but then when you go in these big chasms, you go down to this huge underworld. That's basically, the underworld is as big as the overworld, so basically doubles your space. But it's dark, and a lot of the stuff is redundant. There are some unique areas in the underworld, but a lot of it starts to look the same after a while. It's not that unique. They have some interesting places to explore and a lot of interesting stuff down there, but a lot of people complain that it was boring and repetitive in the underworld, and it wasn't like it was unique stuff that they unlocked, so it wasn't really like the same thing as having a second overworld, right? And it's also very dark, which it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be this dark, scary place, but it gets annoying after a while, running around in the dark, not being able to see anything. Now, you can light the area up with these seeds that create a bunch of light, and that was a great mechanic and everything, but it was just too dark overall, and too much running around. Like, it's great running around in the dark and giving you a need for light, but it was too much. It was still interesting. I loved a lot of the stuff I found in the underground, a lot of cool stuff, cool monsters to fight, and a lot of like ancient ruins and stuff to explore. It was still very cool. Now, that said, I didn't view it as negatively as some people did. Now, as far as basically, instead of just having, you would have a map, right? Like in Breath of the Wild, you have a map of the whole overworld. Now, in this game, you have that same map, but it has 3 layers. You have the sky layer, the ground level layer, and the underworld layer, right? So basically you have triple maps, right? It's like 3 times as much area to explore, but not quite, because with the overworld, there's a huge empty space between islands. So some islands are pretty big and some of them are pretty small, and you have to fly to get from one island to another, which is a whole new game mechanic, but it did not take up anywhere near as much space as, even though it took up that space, most of its empty space between islands in the sky area. Then in the deep underground, basically you had a lot of it was repetitive, walking through these big dark open areas, but it was still fun. And so anyways, there was that. And then basically one big theme is they discovered this whole ancient Zonai civilization that they're now exploring. So instead of exploring I forget how you say it, like the Sheik or Sheik, or however you say that, instead of exploring, like Zelda was exploring that in the and different people would explore that in the Breath of the Wild. In this one, it was Zonai. They were exploring Zonai ruins. There were a lot of people exploring them and learning stuff about them, and you'd learn about them as you go. Some of them had been lifted up into the sky, and some of them were deep underground, and some of them had crashed to the ground at ground level, which kind of changed the landscape around a little bit, which was interesting. So yeah, they had ancient Zonai technology, and this allowed you to grab different components of these and to actually build machines. You could build actual carts with wheels that you could ride around on, and they had all different things, like things that shoot fire, things that shoot electricity, things that do all sorts of different things, and you would have this hand ability to fuse these things together and build all sorts of machines and stuff. That was a whole new game mechanic introduced in this game, which is a lot of fun. It's a little weird and not Zelda-y. It isn't like medieval fantasy type stuff, even though Zelda's kind of departed from pure medieval fantasy. I wouldn't even categorize it like that, but it's a little weird to have that kind of stuff in a Zelda game, but it added a lot to the gameplay, and it was a lot of fun. I definitely wouldn't take that out if it were up to me. It was a lot of fun fusing things together and creating things. So that was a cool thing about this game. Now, another thing about this game is all the weapons in the game. So one of the things when you, release the Demon King, or when he's released from the basement of the castle in this deep cavern, right? After he's released and all the islands float up into the sky and these chasms open up, there's this thing called gloom that comes and it infects the world and messes things up. And if you touch the gloom, it'll disable some of your hearts temporarily until you walk out in the sunlight or take a potion to recover from it. So this gloom also apparently damaged every weapon in the whole game. So each weapon that you find in the game is damaged. So that does a few things. One, the weapons don't look as nice. They have all this dark stuff that looks almost like rust or decay all over them, like they're decayed weapons that don't look anywhere near as cool as they did in the original Breath of the Wild. So you'll have a lot of the same weapons from Breath of the Wild, but they're all decayed and messed up looking. And not only do they look less cool, but they do way less damage too. They're just not as effective weapons. So if you want to use a weapon by itself, it's just not as good, which is kind of disappointing, but that feeds into their new game mechanic where you fuse things together. Now this is a cool game mechanic, but I feel like it took away from just using real weapons. It's a novelty, but after a while it gets old and you're not using real weapons, right? So you can fuse two weapons together to create a real weapon that actually does the amount of damage you're supposed to be able to do to play through the game normally. So if you just use a weapon without fusing things to it, it's going to do way less damage in this game than it did in Breath of the Wild. You have to fuse things to get the real normal amount of damage that they're supposed to do. So for example, you might take two swords and fuse them together so you can have one sword with another sword attached to it. It looks weird. It's fun to create these things, so it's a novelty and it's fun. But after a while, it just kind of looks goofy, and it's hard to really get into. You get tired of it. I get tired of it, anyways. So you can fuse practically anything you could think of. You can take like a stick and fuse it with a barrel, and you can like club enemies with a barrel. That's pretty neat. You can fuse swords to axes, sticks to swords. You can get a big long pole and fuse a sword at the end, and then hit things with it. And depending on what things you fuse to what other things, you can either increase the damage or just create a new type of weapon that gives you more range. Stuff like that. Like if you put a sword on the end of a big stick, you'll have way more range and probably increase the damage a little bit, and might increase the durability. But you can fuse all sorts of different things, and you can fuse other things. Like if you get a gem, like a ruby, you fuse it to your sword, you now have a fire sword. So you hit things and it shoots, I forget if it shot fireball. I think it's just a burning sword. When you hit something, it catches on fire. Whereas you could get like the magic rod, fuse a ruby to that, and it shoots fire. And you could fuse, so some things like rubies, diamonds, that type of stuff, topaz, you fuse it to a weapon and it will basically like enchant the weapon. You can also And you could also fuse things to you, all sorts of things to your arrows to add different effects, which was a lot of fun. You could add things that would like shock enemies from a distance. That part was a lot of fun. I love fusing things to arrows. You could shoot enemies and catch them on fire. You could, you could put these mushrooms on the end of an arrow and shoot an enemy with it, and it would like make them confused. It would like poison them or whatever, things like that. But yeah, a lot of the fusing weapons, like you could fuse a mushroom to a weapon, and it would make it like this bouncy, weird mushroom club. You could fuse all kinds of things that probably shouldn't be fused together, give you interesting weapons, give you weapons that do more damage. Like you get, when you kill enemies, you get things like horns that you can use for crafting and stuff. You could also fuse a horn, like a moblin horn, for example. You fuse it to a weapon. It looks really weird, but it will increase the damage of the weapon by a lot. And depending on how powerful of an enemy you took a horn or whatever from, fuse it to your sword, it's going to do more damage, and it'd just be a more powerful weapon. So you end up having to do that. You have to scavenge like monster parts and stuff to fuse them to your weapons to actually do more damage, which is interesting, and it's a new game mechanic. It's fun and all that, but it doesn't feel as good. After a while, it's just a novelty and it's not as great. It does add a new level, a new tactic or strategy to the game where you have to save up a bunch of monster parts, fuse those to a bunch of powerful weapons before the final battle, that type of stuff, preparing for things. So it's a whole nother level of gameplay that is fun. It adds another layer of fun to it, but it's at the same time, it's also disappointing. Just like having weapons break in Breath of the Wild, you now have to, you still have weapons that break, but you also have to fuse things to the weapons to get them to work. And a lot of the time they either just look goofy or look dumb, and you get bored with them and tired of them, and it's just not as much fun after a while. They're still cool, so there's good to it and bad to it. It can be a lot of fun, but it can also get old and just look a little bit too goofy, and you may not feel like doing it. So my thoughts on that. If you disagree or you have your own thoughts on this mechanic, leave a comment down below letting me know. And yeah, whatever you thought about this game or Breath of the Wild or any of the other Zelda games, leave a comment down below letting us know what you thought of it. And yeah, you know, might want to give me a thumbs up, but also hit that subscribe button and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out on our other great gaming content. We review games, we do a lot of in-game footage, a lot of gameplay recordings. We do retro games, modern games, PC games, console games, mobile games, anything gaming related. We review gaming equipment, controllers, stuff, consoles, stuff like that. We just do a lot of game stuff. If you like that in your YouTube feed, hit the subscribe button, and yeah, don't miss out. So anyways, that's it for today. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys on that next video.